side's case.
Madam Speaker, the difference between raising your child as a vegetarian and making your child have a circumcision is that when they turn 18, they can opt out of being a vegetarian. It doesn't leave any religious scar on them that they have for the rest of their life. That's what we told you in extension, whereby a male circumcision leaves a religious mark on you that you essentially can't opt out of, which fundamentally changes the way in which you view yourself, which means that if you don't believe in the fundamental tenets of that religion, that changes who you are as an individual, and as a result means that you can't self-actualize. What am I going to look at in today's debate? Firstly, this idea of consent, secondly this idea of social utility, and lastly what we heard in extension about the parent-child relationship. So firstly, we say that male circumcision is essentially a religious stamp on one's body, something that people can't opt out of. What we heard from opening up was that parents make decisions for their kids all the time. They gave us the examples of, firstly, like religious schools that people get sent to, and secondly, piercings. The difference is, when you turn 18, you can forget everything you've learned in a religious school. You can forget all of that knowledge. If you want to make the holes from your piercings close up, you're more than welcome to. But the difference is, if you've been circumcised, that's a fundamental thing that's changed in your body, something that's really, really hard to reverse. If you want to, you have to go through a very, very painful procedure, like we heard from opening up. But the difference is, it's already changed the way that you feel about yourself, and it's going to leave scars that are irreversible. What we told you in extension was the fact that religion is something so intrinsic, it is something so personal, it is something that's so fundamentally individual to you, that it defines the way you live your life, who you are, and how you see themselves. We're fine for parents to raise their kids religiously because they can opt out of that once they turn 18. They don't have to choose to believe in that religion. But the difference with circumcision is that that's something that they're stuck with. That's something that changes the way in which they see themselves. So if you don't then identify yourself as a Jewish person when you're older because you find out different things about life and you believe in different things, as a result, you are essentially religiously branded, which means that that can be inherently harmful to you when you want to opt out of that culture, if you want to opt out of that religion, because you essentially have the equivalent of a religious branding on them. We think that's really harmful. But we think that also goes against the way in which people can self-actualize, because if people see themselves as fundamentally different to who they are, they can leave the Jewish church if they want, but they have something for the rest of them, for the rest of their life, which is essentially a religious branding that even if they change, still has sort of emotional scars that they can't get rid of. So secondly, onto this issue of social utility, because we heard from opening up that this singles kids out because a kid who isn't circumcised is rejected from the kids that are. I'm not sure, but what we say is we're not happy for any kid to be circumcised. We think that's something where you change the culture of that religion, and as a result we want to send a message that this is not okay. But they say that it makes the community disgusted and see that the child is unclean. We think that's a really horrible thing, and what we think you do with this model on this side of the house is you send a message to that community which makes them change the way in which they conduct this practice, because firstly you can't consent physically, and secondly you can't consent spiritually to ascribe to that religion for the rest of your life. We think that's very harmful. But we also heard both from opening and closing about the certain benefits to the child. They talked about firstly sexual pleasure. Well, we say unless babies are having sex now, then we don't see what the relevance of that is. If when they turn 18 and that's something that they want to do for themselves, they are more than welcome to do that. We heard secondly about STDs and all the other crap that Pete wanted to talk about. Once again, if that's such a fundamental concern to them, when they are nearing the age of nearing having sex, and we hope kids at 10 aren't doing that, then that's something they can do. They can take on the full risks from that if they want to get the certain benefits that thing, whatever. I'll take POI if they want. Yeah.
Right. What is it inherent to circumcision that would mark me as Jewish?
Because it's a fundamental tenet of the Jewish religion, and we think that it makes people as a Jew for the rest of their life. If you see yourself as that person, something that's been branded upon you as a child, and as a result, if you don't like being a Jewish person, then you have to see that in the mirror, see that you have been branded in that particular way, and that might not be in accordance to who you are as an individual. We think that's very harmful. So So with the benefits of the child, we say like, even if there were all these benefits they want to talk about, taking that argument at best with like prevention of STDs and like enhanced sexual pleasure, we say that that still doesn't trump like the whole point that we've been making in extension about like consenting to like the physical harms that circumcision entails, and secondly to like the spiritual harms if you don't identify yourself as a person within that religion and you want to opt out of that structure, and as a result are unable to, because like you may leave that religion but you still have that essentially a religious branding on you, on your body for the rest of your life. We think that's pretty bad. Lastly, onto this idea of like the parent-child relationship, which we heard from closing. Pete firstly talked about this legacy, and parents want to leave a legacy, you know, with their kids. We think like if a parent's like view of their child is defined by the way in which their penis is shaped, then we think that's a pretty like horrible thing to be basing the legacy and the way you view like your kids and how they will go about fulfilling the rest of their life. So we think that parents should view their child's legacy about what they've achieved and what they've done and how they've lived their life, not necessarily whether they had some procedure when they were a kid. We think that's a pretty bad thing. Lastly, we heard about the government role. Like obviously we think the government's role, this is why like we're proposing this topic in the first place. But they gave us the example of vegetarianism, and I already touched on this in my opening. No. But we told you that like being a vegetarian is something you can opt out of. When you turn 18 and you decide you want to eat meat, then you can eat meat. You can do that. But the difference is when you turn 18, it is very, very hard to suddenly say, no, I don't want to be circumcised anymore, because you are. It's very, very hard, and even if you were to go through a very, very painful operation, it still doesn't change the fact about how you view yourself, how you see yourself as an individual, and how a certain culture may be intrinsic to who you are. We think that's fundamentally harmful. So because we don't think that kids can consent to this both physically, and because spiritually they can't opt out of that culture, of that religion, and because we don't see the social utility in it, and even if there was a social utility, we think the argument of consent trumps that. Lastly, because we don't think that the parent-child relationship really has a standing in this debate. We think if parents want their child to have a legacy, then it should be about what that child has achieved, not what the shape of their penis is. We are more than proud to propose.
I'd like to thank Jess and call on Kat to close tonight's debate.